So I don't have much time. I start with Rassan Haji's assertion that in the unequal struggle between Palestinians and Israelis, the Palestinians are always imagined on the verge of being squashed, and with them all the Arab masses' aspirations of a dignified life, thus the title. This suggests a kind of linkage between Palestinian disempowerment and the Arab revolutions of 2011. With the emergence in Syria and Iraq of the radical Islamic State group, Daesh, which is committed to erasing the artificial borders drawn by colonialism, the legitimacy of the nation-state system is being challenged, and with it, Palestinian aspirations of a dignified life in the former state of their own. So what are the implications of the recent developments in the broader region for the Palestinian national movement? So for me, there are several interesting lines of inquiry here that begin to address a question that's been kind of preoccupying me for some years, which is how is it possible to envisage a positive outcome for Palestinian national longings in the absence of a territorial state. So I want to make some suggestions about that, building on Dan Webb's argument that if we seek a challenge to the hegemony of globalization, it is worth looking at some forms of contemporary radical Islam. So the paper is framed in the following terms. To begin with, it examines the crisis of Palestinian nationalism. Second, it explores the possibility that Islamism may present a viable alternative to Western so-called grand narratives of modernity and progress, in Webb's words, the hegemony of globalization. And third, it addresses the difficulty of thinking outside currently available models of political belonging. So this is drawing on field work that I've been doing for some years, both in the Palestinian territories and in Lebanon, which have involved interviewing large numbers of people, women and men across the social and political spectrum. And I want to explore the problematic articulation of the Palestinian national struggle as an emancipatory project. So by viewing the unequal struggle through the lens of Arab revolutions and subsequent emergence of ISIS, I'll argue that although feelings of attachment to Palestine remain strong, in an age of globalization and reduced sovereignty, the time of nations and their states seem to be passing. So since its beginning, in the early 20th century, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has been characterized by what Sousa calls the territorialization of identity. Both Palestinians and Israelis have constructed narratives based on competing claims to territory and legitimacy. And the conception of territory continues to be a defining component of Palestinian national self-perception and struggle. The Palestinian people, as we know, became a nation without territory in 1948 when the State of Israel was established, causing a mass exodus of Palestinians from their homeland. And it's interesting to recall that many Palestinians who had heeded the call of Arab nationalism and protection felt betrayed by the inability of the Arab nation to rescue them from defeat. The experience of national trauma constructed 1948 as a so-called site of memory and continues to reinforce for Palestinians the link between identity and the existence of a nation state. So modern nationalism, as we know, is exported to the Middle East under Western imperialism. However, there are fundamental differences between nationalism in the West and the Arab and Palestinian nationalisms that emerged in the early 20th century. For Palestinians, nationalism developed not only because Palestinians have been attached to their territory and because they've shared religion, language, customs, and so on, but because the catastrophe of 1948 and more recently, of course, the Israeli occupation have sharpened and heightened their nationalistic feelings. Palestinian identity, as CSID notes, hinges on the experience of dispossession and exile. In the absence of territory, he suggests that dispersed Palestinians have reconstructed their identity through bottom-up processes which are generated through localized experiences and sentiments. Moshe Ammer has written about the construction of the homeland in Palestinian nationalist discourses. Nationalism can be thought of as an ideology of boundedness and a believed or claimed congruity between people, territory, and state. Palestinian nationalism depends on such claims. It emerged, at least in part, as a reaction against adverse experiences and can be characterized, I think, as a kind of embattled form of nationalism, as highlighted by the assertion that Palestinians are always in danger of being squashed. So a significant competitor of Arab nationalist aspirations has been the ideology of Islamism, which seeks to extinguish national boundaries and replace them with a renewed sense of a global Islamic ummah. The challenge for Muslim communities has been to offer a viable alternative to the dominance of the West. Islamism as a political discourse is a powerful source of critical debate in the struggle against the undemocratic imposition of a new world order, seen as being capable of addressing the issues raised by Western modernization processes in the Middle East. Palestinians have not been immune from the dissonance between nationalism and Islamism. In response to the failure of Arab nationalism and Palestinian nationalist militancy, an Islamic resistance movement emerged in the West Bank and Gaza Strip during the first Intifada in the late 1980s to fulfill the aspirations of the Palestinians' dream of creating a state. Many Palestinians, frustrated by their inability to end the Israeli occupation, responded positively to Hamas's agenda of blending Islamism and resistance. This model of Islamism, which comes out of a very particular cultural, political milieu within Palestinian society, has come to represent an increasingly significant strand in the nationalist debate. For Hamas, Islam becomes the primary source of identification, and Islamist categories are imported for explicit nationalist aims which provide an imagining of the nation as belonging to a larger collective. Hamas's intertwining of religion and nationalism has offered a compelling discourse for Palestinian Muslims seeking an alternative to secular politics and a fresh approach to the conflict with Israel. So it's been frequently observed that underlying much of the recent upheaval in the Arab region has been a persistent failure by the international community to resolve or even address the long-running Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Many Arab citizens associate the inability or unwillingness of their governments to pay more than lip service to Palestinian claims of justice with corruption or illegitimacy. As Hezbollah member of the Lebanese parliament, Ali Fayyad, argues, Arab demands for freedom cannot be separated from calls for resistance against Israel. Recent events have caused some in the Arab world to question whether the Western model of development and inevitable progress, as Webb's hegemony of globalization, is really appropriate for a region with a distinctive history and culture, especially in light of Western failure to resolve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So I think I need to miss most of this out. All right, let me just move to another section. So there's another way of conceptualizing the Palestinian struggle, which does not rely on the territorialization of identity and recognizes that the language of nationalism is indeed not the answer for Israel-Palestine. During my own research with Palestinian exile communities, I noticed a tension between the yearning to return to Palestine expressed by many Palestinians living in exile and the somewhat different sentiments articulated by refugees, for example, who had fled from Nahar al-Barid camp in Tripoli in 2007 and also from Yarmouk camp in Damascus more recently. In both cases, rather than mythologizing Palestine as a place of eventual return, many spoke of feeling settled and contented in their place of refuge. They had replaced the dream of return with a reality of comfortable living conditions, education for their children, hope for the future. As a former resident of Nahar al-Barid remarked, "We had a lovely life, we lived peacefully. And for another person, the camp was equated with the homeland. We forgot Palestine because we were living happily. And according to another person who fled from Yarmouk, she equated her own loss with her parents' flight from Palestine. She said, I did not appreciate the value of my life until I lost it. So there's an argument that globalization renders the nationalist project anachronistic. Palestinian scholar Mosli Kanane argues that what he calls Palestinianity is nothing to do with having a state. It is a historically generated mode of being and living, a sense of belonging to Palestine and sharing a Palestinian identity. And his argument, his words are echoed by a woman in Burj al-Barashni camp in Beirut. She said, wherever they are, Palestinians belong to one identity. And another person, a young man from Yarmouk camp, he fled from there, he said, when I left the camp, I felt as if I had left my soul. By that, he didn't mean the camp itself, but the people who made it. And he explained that it is an idea, not a matter of place. We can recreate it anywhere. And this raises the whole idea, the notion of flexible citizenship, which is concerned more with minority identity formation at the intersections of national and transnational political arenas. So I've tried to talk about some, unfortunately I wasn't able to give you the full paper, but I've tried to sort of suggest some ideas, and maybe I can explore it more if you have questions, but I'll stop at that point. Thank you very much.